During the last years, hardly any other game got as hyped as Cyberpunk 2077, the open-world RPG from PROJEKT RED, the Polish studio behind the Witcher games. And hardly anyone will have missed all the negative headlines this release brought with it. This release was on the 10th of December 2020. A few months and about 100 hours within the game later, I finally finished it. And with that, it's time for my review and conclusion, in which I will show you the strengths and weaknesses the game got in my perspective. And I can already tell you that this perspective differs quite a bit from what you might have heard from other sources. So stay tuned. Let's start with the story, and with a warning of light spoilers, as parts of the main story only unfold after about 10 hours, and it is only then that Keanu Reeves finds his way into the game. And without mentioning his role in the game, a review would not be complete. In difference to the main character in the Witcher series, the one we got to play in Cyberpunk 2077 isn't completely predefined, and instead we have to create it at the start of the game. After choosing the game difficulty, we first start with choosing one of the 3 backgrounds for our character, which for the first hour of the game defines a completely different entry into the game. After that, it will just be used here and there for different dialogue options, which rarely make any difference. As we aren't given a fixed character, we can also do some rather detailed settings regarding the sex of the character, which also includes choosing between a male and a female voice. Of course, we also have various settings for our appearance. We can set the length of our nose, for example, the texture of our skin, choose which tattoos we got, or whether we are wearing contact lenses or using cybernetic eyes. While the game tells us, in Night City, looks are everything. During character creation, your looks actually have no real consequences for the game. And as you also play it from a first-person perspective, where you can look down to your legs and feet, you won't ever see much more of your character than your trousers, boots and arms for the most time, which is a bit disappointing somehow. But as the looks are really not relevant at all, the game also gets away with not offering any options for adjustments after the initial character creation, even though that feels a bit odd in such a cyberpunk setting. And with that, we are getting back to the story itself. As mentioned, we are getting a very different start of the game depending on our chosen character background, after which we are then ending up on the same story plot. During that time frame, it doesn't become really clear whether we are currently in some kind of prologue or in the actual game, and that doesn't change for quite some time. The real game, if you want to call it like that, only starts at about the 10th hour of the game, where an event takes place which leaves us with a computer chip in our head, which will then define the main story. On this chip is a copy from a rockstar and terrorist called Johnny Silverhand, who already died many years ago and who is embodied by Keanu Reeves and also voiced by him in the English version.
I'm here to say goodbye to all of you.
Embodied in the sense that this copy of Johnny is not just talking to us, but also keeps showing up within the world. But the fact that we got someone else living in our head isn't even the biggest issue now. The chip is also aggressive and starts to override our own personality with Johnny's, and so our goal is to find means and ways to stop that from progressing. While Johnny will try to kill us first, just shortly thereafter he will have a somewhat sudden change of heart and will follow his own agenda, which seems to be mostly about harming Arasaka, which is one of the mega corporations in the city. So basically he is always with us and will show up various times during the main quests as well as during side quests to talk to us and give more or less helpful advices. But of course we are the only one who is actually able to see him at any time.
Zapper dumples and filth. In some ways, Night City never changes. Arasaka's still a despotic machine and the world's on a collision course with chaos. But hey, at least Rogue's still alive.
Besides of the main quest line, which is mostly about the chip with Silverhand and the corporation Arasaka, there are also various side quests, which again are split up in additional subcategories. Among these side quests, there are bigger quest lines, which only start after reaching a certain point in the main quest, but also very trivial one-off quests. And in that regard, I also see quite a big drop in quality. While the main quest line as well as the bigger side quests are very well implemented and fleshed out, most of the smaller quests feel very much like assembly line work. Within the longer quest lines, you'll encounter lots of dialogues, scripted sections, and also quite a few options for decisions, though these decisions will almost never lead to any additional additional new quests, but rather change the story here and there and leads to other dialogues at other points in the game. The one-off side quests are basically irrelevant in that regard. They will usually show up on the city map without further information at first, and if you come close to them, you will get a call with a very brief description, which usually ends with a "details attached", so that you will then have to read the actual background and story of the quest, if you are actually interested in that. But that way, the quest is already separated into the important info, which you can see in the quest description and was told in the call, and the fluff, which you don't need to read as it's not relevant. While you basically know what to focus on, the quest also feels even more generic that way. Usually, you will just need to enter a building, steal something or kill someone and leave it again. The only real decision you got there is the way you want to handle this. For example, if you want to go with gunfire and explosions, or if you want to sneak around, which often results in a higher reward. Though that doesn't mean that you don't have this choice in the main quests as well. After completing the target and leaving the area, you get another phone call, the quest giver will thank you for completing it, and that's it. While I had a lot of fun with the main quests and also with the more fleshed out and longer side quests, which are well made, have lots of custom animations and good voice acting, the one-off side quests on the other hand appeared to be filler content, which was just there in order to make the game last longer. Not that you necessarily had to complete them though. In fact, you would probably not have any issues finishing the game without doing any of them, thanks to other problems, which we will get back to later. When we have a look at the world map, we can see the whole city and the area around it. Everything is freely reachable by just walking, driving with a car, or also via quick travel if we use one of the quick travel terminals. But on the map we can also see lots of blue symbols indicating robberies and other tasks where we can help the police in order to get some more XP. These are even more obvious filler content, which also break with the immersion of the world to some degree. I mean, of course the world of Cyberpunk is harsh, lives aren't worth much, but these robberies where you can just massacre everyone on the street without anyone caring make the world appear less believable. Sure, the bystanders will run around screaming, and if you accidentally hit them, some cops will show up, but this actually makes things worse. It's annoying enough that in the heat of a battle some stray bullet can easily hit some innocent people, but well, that's on you. Even more annoying is the horrible implementation of the police, which is much worse than how the police works in GTA, for example. In Cyberpunk 2077, it only takes a few seconds after a crime until the police just pops up out of nothing right in front of you. They don't even need to drive towards you. This isn't just breaking the immersion, but also leads to the fact that firefights with the police are generally pointless due to the endless respawn. On the other hand, if you just jump into your car and drive away, then it will also just take a few seconds until the police loses interest in you. However, it's more likely that you will instead just reload the game if you accidentally hit a civilian. In any case, I don't think neither the robberies at every corner of the city, nor the implementation of the police in the game is any good. Speaking of loading the game, in Cyberpunk 2077 you got a hotkey for doing quick saves, but there is no hotkey for quick loading, which makes loading unnecessarily cumbersome, so that I personally rather get myself killed instead, which then automatically prompts to the reload instead of going into the menu manually. It's not necessarily faster, but less cumbersome. It's not a super big issue, but one other thing where I'm wondering why. But back to the city, which as mentioned can be freely traversed and which is often also presented as one of the highlights of the game. This last thing, however, is something I see somewhat differently. The visuals of the city are really impressive, and they do a great job in transporting this cyberpunk vibe. Whether you are checking out some kind of Chinatown, walking between skyscrapers overloaded with neon advertisements, you are hanging out in the slums of the suburbs, or you are paying a visit to the huge waste dumps just outside of the city, it all looks great. You will come across the one or other really impressive panoramic view of the city. But at the same time, that is also the catch. In the Fallout shooter RPGs, I had a lot of fun just exploring and getting surprised by all the little details the developers placed all over the world, which also get your imagination running. It could be just a house of pencils on the desk of a bored office worker, the leftovers of an apocalypse party in the shape of dozens of empty beer bottles on a gigantic radar dish, the hideout of some survivor who went insane, who scribbled some stuff to the walls, or the skeletons of a family which probably collectively took their own lives. In Cyberpunk 2077 you have very cool panoramic views on the city, and the city does feel alive, but if you really start to look closer, start explore locations outside of the quests, you will get disappointed as there's usually nothing at all behind this facade. You could say that the world is some kind of two-dimensional playing mat serving as background for the countless robberies and quests in the game. While in Fallout the world is some kind of secret actor in itself, in Cyberpunk 2077 the world is nothing but a prop and not really worth to spend any time with. Even though the developers gave each block in the city its own identity, and having done a pretty good job with that, as a player I never really internalized these specifics of the city, as the game is not only allowing the player to quickly move from one end of the city to the other, but it's also sending the player all over the place for several quests. Due to traveling back and forth all the time, the different facets of the city just got mushed together in my perception. Very different to a Fallout game or a typical fantasy RPG in which you venture into some old dwarven mines, stay there for hours until your job is done, and then you finally return to your homely city, and basically save all these locations with distinctive impressions in your brain. And after I talked a lot about how the game is presenting itself and which options for actions you have as a player, we are now getting to the mechanics of the game. And there we are greeted by misery wherever we look. Let's start with street cred, which we can gain by killing enemies and finishing missions. With higher levels of street cred, more missions as well as more vendors become available. However, you don't need to pay attention to this, as this value is maxed out extremely quickly anyways. Just to put it into perspective, both your character and your street cred have a maximum level of 50. And you already hit the 50 street cred on a character of just level 26, which made the whole mechanic obsolete. It's probably designed to guide the player a bit so that he or she isn't overwhelmed by a massive amount and the hardest missions right away, but it's not really doing a great job at that, as right from the start you can go for missions and into areas where you have barely any chance of survival. In addition, some hours into the game the whole balancing of the game crumbles anyways, and the difficulty of the areas and quests becomes really non-existent, so that enemies don't pose any challenge anymore anyways. Not that the enemies can't kill you anymore, you can still die really quickly, but it doesn't take too long until you can kill them without them ever posing any real threat, and that's almost independent of how you skill or equip your character. Improving your character basically works on 2 or 3 different layers. First of all, you will receive 1 attribute point on every level up, which you can invest into one of the 5 attributes of your character. These are used in the game for unlocking additional actions, for example in dialogues or for hacking. But they also grant some passive bonuses in combat, and they also determine how far you can develop the skills which are assigned to this attribute. And with that we arrived on the second layer. For skills we also get 1 point to distribute on each level up. There is another way to get new skill points, but I will get back to that in a few minutes. Within each attribute we can find 2 or 3 skill trees, which actually look like trees, but that is pure decoration as the skills are completely independent of each other. These skills are mostly passive improvements, procs and unlocks. For example, some skills improve the damage of a specific weapon type. One skill will show the blast radius of grenades, and another one will give you more time before you are spotted when sneaking. In order to craft more than just the most basic items, you will also need to put skill points into your crafting talent tree. While completing missions and killing enemies will grant you experience points which increase your character level, the usage of these abilities will also give you separate XP, which is just for leveling up the specific talent trees. For example, shooting with your pistol will grant you experience points in your pistol talent tree, and stealth kills will accordingly grant points in the stealth tree. And this is then the third layer. Within these trees you have 3 levels which are separate from your main character level and which will then grant further bonuses, and among these are also additional skill points which you can invest freely into any skill of any skill tree. This system is not just convoluted and unnecessarily complicated, it's also, like a couple of other things, badly explained in the game. And lastly, it's also almost pointless due to the bad balancing in the game. Yes, you can improve your skills and create a more individual character that way, but you quickly reach the point where you don't know what to do with all these skill points, and especially in the second part of the game, you rather search for skills which are the least useless for you, instead of looking forward to anything or improve something to a degree where it actually makes a difference. That's also because rather early in the game you will get the means to kill enemies in ways where your skills don't really matter anymore. For example, there's a whole category of weapons which allow you to shoot through walls and whole buildings. With the use of hacks and implants you can then just have all enemies being shown through these walls, so that you can kill most of the enemies within the building without even entering it. And similar issues also apply to other options you have. Just to make combat a little bit more interesting, most of the time I stuck to sneaking around and stealth killing enemies, or just shooting around with my pistol, which also worked great even though I didn't put a single skill point into the pistol tree. So the whole character system is just mechanically irrelevant fluff, except of the attributes themselves, which offer additional options, for example in dialogues, which might then lead to a different solution for a quest. Even worse than the character system is the crafting system, which as mentioned requires putting skill points into the crafting tree. That way you can craft more and more items after a while, which, well, are basically all unnecessary, as the items you can find are already so strong that it just can't make much of a difference. Additionally, this system is as player unfriendly as it could possibly be, starting with having the player clicking and holding the mouse button once for every single component upgrade. If you are consequently using all the items and components, you will need to click thousands of times, meaning out of 100 hours you will likely spend 2 hours just with clicking on the same button. Next up are iconic, unique weapons and an upgrade system which allows you to upgrade items to a higher quality level. In that step, your weapon will receive random new attributes. So if you want to get the maximum out of it, you would need to save and load, as, well, these items are unique and are getting consumed during the crafting process, and upgrading them again is not possible. Of course, this is also just fluff, as you don't need the additional weapon power anyways. And I guess because of that, it's also not the end of the world that by upgrading the weapon it is always being set to your current character level, so that a weapon which you upgraded to the maximum quality at level 30 will be worse than one you upgraded on level 31. But there's another mechanic which allows you to also upgrade the item level. But for some reason someone thought it was a good idea to have these upgrade costs to increase exponentially. I don't want to use the vulgar language of the game here, but let's say that my guinea pig could have created a better system. And that's dead for over 20 years now. Besides of that, the item system is pretty much standard. Different quality levels, surprisingly low attribute requirements, the interface is as cumbersome as in other parts of the game, and as the rest of the game it's also missing elemental explanations for some of the mechanics which would have been important if the game had functioning balance, like the explanation that bonuses for critical hits don't add up, or how to estimate the armor values where you are wondering if it's doing anything at all. Let's conclude this topic and summarize that the mechanics of the game are a disaster in every regard. The sole positive aspect here is just that they can be ignored easily for the most part, and they don't actively trouble you in the rest of the game. Of course, that means that accordingly there are hardly any challenging fights if you exclude the very beginning of the game, especially if you are jumping to quests or areas which are intended for a higher level. And with that we are getting to the technical aspects, graphics, sound and bugs. While the game received the most praise for its graphics, its performance and bugs also led to the most criticism. I played the PC version, and while it should have had less problems in general than the console versions, I encountered barely any major issues at all. No, the game wasn't bug-free, but it was mostly minor issues which were continuously showing up, like some items which you should have been able to pick up, but which you couldn't. One time one graphical and sound effect got stuck and 2 music tracks were playing at the same time until I restarted the game. But there wasn't anything which had any major impact on the game. Regarding that, I found all the mechanics, including the character system, but also things like the cops which spawn into your face, to be much more critical. The graphics of the game are top notch. Though I only played with the GTX 1070 with mixed settings and on 1080p, so I didn't see the highest quality of graphics, including ray tracing, and also cannot show it in this review. That said, the graphics are looking nice anyways, though as mentioned before there isn't much behind the facade. With the GTX 1060 or 970 it should still run on playable frame rates beyond 30 FPS on 1080p.
Fuck. Yes. We'll need backup.
The game also has plenty of voice acting. And while I was using the German version during my playthrough, I also checked out the English one for this review, and from what I can tell, the voice acting here is very well done. The game does use a lot of foul language, but while I found it to be over the top in the German localization, its original use in English didn't feel unnatural.
The motherfucker screwed me over. Boss, I will take care of it. I just need you to give me a chance. Boss, come on. How many times have I moved things for you? And how many times have I failed? You have my word. After dark? Okay. No, don't call off the meet. Just don't show up. I'll take care of everything. Do you even have to ask? Of course I will. Thanks, boss. You won't regret this. Okay. I have bought us some time.
So what's the overall conclusion for Cyberpunk 2077? How much fun you will have with the game is strongly depending on how you play it. If you focus on the main quests and the more fleshed out side quests and know how to differentiate between them in the quest overview, then you will be less bored by the assembly line work. If you value story higher than mechanics, then you will have no problems with just ignoring the plethora of bad mechanics in the game. If you strictly follow the quests and aren't really the type of player who goes his or her own way exploring the world, then it might not come to your attention that most of the work into designing the world was put into creating beautiful facades beyond which there isn't really much to find. My final rating for the game now is still a full thumbs up, but one which barely made it. I still wouldn't give a clear recommendation for buying the game at the current moment and for the full price. If you just want to play the game for the story and don't bother with all the rest, including all the side quests, then the game will be much shorter and the 60 euros or dollars are hard to justify. If you want to get everything out of the game, which there is, then the overall quality isn't necessarily there where I would want to spend that much money. So instead I would recommend to wait for now and see how far PROJEKT RED will still improve the game with patches and how much they will add to it with DLCs. And then check back what you get offered in 1 or 2 years in some cheaper complete edition or whatever it will be called then. And that was my take on Cyberpunk 2077. Like always, I hope that my review was helpful to you and you got a good idea about what the game has to offer to you. If that is the case, I would appreciate it if you could rate this video. In order to not miss any further videos, you can also subscribe to this channel, which besides of reviews will also contain previews, let's plays and maybe some other content in the future. If you like, you can also visit my webpage at ndnw.net, where you can get a quick overview of all the games I ever played. While the linked videos are in German, there is a very brief English description for each game, and maybe it can just be fun to scroll through the screenshots and go down memory lane. And with that, I say goodbye for now. Thanks for watching and have fun. I will get my car now and get out of Night City and into the next adventure. Great. I guess that means I got to walk.